Okay, now I think we're ready to start. Sorry, I'm a little late. Oh. Can everybody hear me okay? Oh, good. Sorry, I'm a little late. The camera fell over and I had to put it back up real quick. So I apologize for the couple minutes of lateness, but we are here, finally. Can everybody hear me okay? Well, I would assume if you couldn't hear me, people would be saying stuff in the chat by now. So, all right. So, welcome to another episode of Torn Book Club. This is, May 3rd? And we're doing another episode in our long line of episodes about the Silmarillion. And I actually have begun trying to plan out the run of these episodes all the way to the end, and right now the current schedule has us focusing on the Silmarillion in one form or another from now all the way to the end of August. So this is pretty much going to be the entire summer, which is good. I'm okay with that. It is the beginning of the month. It's the beginning of May, and as such, we have a new book of the month before we get into Silmarillion. For this month, for May, our book of the month will be Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. I just finished reading this a few days ago, and I gotta say it actually kind of brought a tear to my eye. This is a really fantastic sci-fi book, and the reason I chose it was because it's being made into a TV miniseries in the next few months. So it's going to be topical, and it's a really fascinating story. It's probably one of my favorites now. So I'm looking forward to talking about that at the end of the month. And part of the schedule that I put together includes episodes where we'll be taking a break from the Silmarillion to discuss books of the month. So I've got one planned for May, I've got another one planned for June, but beyond that, I'm still looking. I might have a possibility for July, but if anybody has any suggestions for stuff they'd like us to read, please leave a comment on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. Email me at Saruman with 2 N's at theonering.net, and we'll go from there. I do have a few suggestions from some of you over the last few months. So plenty to choose from, but I'd love to get more suggestions from anybody as we keep going. So, with all of that out of the way, let us get into the next chapter of the Silmarillion. Now, this week we're going to be doing 3 chapters, but one of them is moderately long, the other 2 are very short. So I figure we could probably get through all 3 this week. So we'll begin with a little bit of a recap of where we are so far. And to do that, I'm actually going to take us over to the parchment board. So where do we stand right now? Actually, no, I'm not going to take us there quite yet. We can just go over some of the plot points so far. Feanor has created the Silmarils. Melkor has been unchained. He has gone down to Avathar, made a deal with Ungoliant. They've come back and they've destroyed the 2 trees and cast all the world into darkness and killed Finwë, Feanor's father, and Feanor has gathered a large host of Noldor elves to cross back over into Middle-earth to hunt down Melkor, now named Morgoth, the black foe of the world, in order to retake the Silmarils and to establish their own dominion over Middle-earth before men arrive. And there's been a bit of a shakeup there because on their journey, Feanor slaughtered a whole bunch of Teleri elves and was given a curse that he and all of his people uh, will come to nothing but despair and ruin as they attempt to achieve their goals of retrieving the Silmarils. And Feanor pretty much just laughs it off and then abandons his brother Fingolfin and his people in the wastes of Ahriman. Not right now. In the wastes of Ahriman, and forcing them to take the treacherous hike across the icy Helcaraxa into Middle-earth. And Feanor has crossed over with some ships that he stole from the Teleri, and then burned them once they got across. And that's where we leave off with Feanor. And now we go into the next chapter called Of the Sindar, which I know some of us have been really looking forward to. And this is a chapter that's going to be talking about all the different things that are happening, that have been happening in Middle-earth this whole time. So, so we're actually going to take a little trip back in time, back to, we're going to recap a little bit of where things stood in Middle-earth, where we left off. So we'll begin by bringing up the good old map. If I can find it here. Here it is. Here's the map of Middle-earth, and just to recap the journey real quick, we have the elves first came into being around probably further up here in an area called Cuivienen, and they were convinced by the Valar to go across Middle-earth and cross the sea into Valinor and to live in peace there. And they were split into three hosts, the Vanyar, the Noldor, who pretty much just went there straight, and then the Teleri, who kind of got broken up along the way. So as they went across, they came here to Anduin, the river Anduin, and they had their first split where one of the elves named Lenwë decided this is far enough, and took a bunch of elves with them, and they decided they would stay there and they would travel south down the Anduin. Whether or not they were going to eventually rejoin up with them, or whether they were cool with just staying there is sort of up in the air. But these elves that stayed behind here were called the Nandor, and they pretty much hung out here in this land called Eriador, or this is not Eriador. This is Eriador. And so the rest of the Teleri elves cross through Eriador and get to right about here to a forest called Non Elmoth, where the leader of the party, Elwë, becomes enchanted by the Maya Melian, who has been hanging out in that forest, and they fall in love, and he falls under a spell for a very long time. And eventually the Teleri elves decide that they have to keep going, and Elwë's brother Olwë takes over the leadership. But a bunch of the Teleri elves still want to stay there and wait for Elwë to come back from wherever he is. So we have another split. And those elves that stay behind are refer to themselves for a time as the Forsaken or the Dispossessed, but eventually when Elwë returns, they become the Sindar. And then we have our last split right around here. And I'm going to have to refer to the chart because I can never remember these guys' names. And they're not even in there. Okay, so they're not even in there. But anyway, a group of the Teleri around here. At this point, they've kind of missed the boat, or I should say, the giant moving island that Ulmo set up for the elves to take them to Valinor. Aravandi says, and they stared at each other for a long, long time because apparently elves and Maiar don't need to use the bathroom. Well, of course not. They're immortal beings. Um, so, where was I? So, the elves who stay here in this bay, they become friends with Ase, who is a Maiar who works for Ulmo, the Lord of the Seas. And he takes them under his wing, teaches them seacraft and shipcraft, and then eventually Ulmo comes back and says, okay, now I can take you guys to Valinor. And then we have another split between those who go with Ulmo to Valinor and those who stay behind because they like it here. And those are the seafaring elves led by Círdan the shipwright. So we've got a good wide spread of elves who have sort of ceded lands all throughout here. And this whole area has been cast into perpetual night because of the destruction of the lamps of the Valar. And we have the trees of Valinor that are in Valinor, but the light doesn't quite get over to here. So everything is under starlight. Everything is still very much asleep. All the trees and all the beasts, they were put under by Yavanna before they took out Morgoth, or before they took out Melkor and dragged him to Valinor to chain him up for 3 ages. And so we had this whole Middle Earth, mostly this area here, Beleriand, where a lot of the plants and a lot of the beasts are still asleep, but the elves who have stayed behind pretty much have free reign of the place at this point. And all of this is Tolkien sort of breaks this down into the 3 different ages of the chaining of Melkor, and describes a couple main incidents or main plot points that happen in that time. So we have the first age of the chaining of Melkor, which is really kind of a great time to be an elf in Middle Earth because there is no there's really nothing hindering them. Everything is covered in starlight. Elwë has finally returned. He's come out of his trance with Melian, and he is now sort of taken on the demeanor of a Maya himself, and he's reclaimed kingship over everybody, and he has taken the name Thingol. Unfortunately, I couldn't find many portraits of Thingol that don't make him look utterly sinister, which is a real shame, because at this point in the story, he's not. And he never really is sinister. He's kind of a jerk sometimes as the story goes on. But for right now, he is this unifying king who is bringing all the elves together under his rule. And it's a very benevolent rule. And he rules alongside his queen, who is, of course, Melian the Maya. And some of you may recognize this portrait of Melian. It was done by our own Ava. And it's a beautiful portrait of Melian. There's a lot going on here. And you can see down at the bottom of the image is a bit of the entrance to the realm of Thingol called Menegroth, which we'll get into a little bit later. So Thingol and Melian rule over everybody. Melian is starting to wake up a lot of the things that have been asleep this whole time, and everybody is living in peace. Any of the creatures that are still around after the destruction of Melkor's fortress in Utumno are pretty much just they're they're really not going far afield. They're kind of staying to themselves. And Orome, the hunter Valar, is still occasionally crossing over into Middle Earth and going on a hunt. And Tolkien says that whenever they hear the horns of Orome and the galloping of Nahar, then they know that everything is fine and that any dark creatures are pretty much going away for a while. So like I said, it's a good time to be an elf right now. This is the first age of the Chaining of Melkor. Um, and so yeah, and through during this time, it there is the introduction of a certain character, the daughter. What is Aravandi saying? Kimberly 80 on DeviantArt has a couple great pics of Thingol. He's kind of hot the way she drew him. Hot, Hawt. Nice. So I'll have to look those up. So anyway, back to Thingol and Melian. They have a child, and that child is somebody you probably have heard of, Luthien, the fairest being in all of Middle-earth who ever was or ever will be. And she plays a big role later on, but for now, she's just dancing around. Everybody's dancing around, kicking back, enjoying their time. Like I said, like I keep coming back to, it's a good time to be an elf right now. And that's pretty much how that age plays out. Just everybody getting along great. And then we enter the second age of the Chaining of Melkor, and somebody arrives in a Beleriand who the elves were not expecting. Those were the dwarves. The dwarves have arrived. Now, as we've talked about before with the dwarves, they were created by the Valar Aule against the wishes of Eru Ilúvatar, but Ilúvatar still took them under his wing, and he told Aule they have to remain asleep until at least after the awakening of the elves, and so he does that. He puts them underground. Let's go back to the map so I can sort of show you where they are going. They are mostly put in the mountains in this area here in Eriador. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to zoom in on the map a little bit. Watch the magic of technology. 1 second. There we go. So from now on, we're going to focus a bit more on this area here, Beleriand. So we've got dwarves, and they're starting to come out of this area here, this mountain range here, called the Blue Mountains, or Ered Luin. And they're mostly coming out of 2 dwarf cities here that are both in this area. And they're called Belegost and Nogrod. Nogrod. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know. And these are 2 dwarf cities. There are several others further east in Eriador, including, and Tolkien mentions this one by name, probably because it's a name that's recognizable, and that's an area called Khazad-dûm, which is better known as Moria in the later years. But it's so far away that it's really not seen as anything more than, like, he calls it a rumor, and where does he say it? He basically says that it's just referred to as a rumor by the dwarves, and the elves don't really go there. They don't really go into the dwarf cities, but the dwarves are very happy to come and meet them and to learn their languages and all of that. So let's go back to the dwarves here. And the dwarves learn the language of the elves and begin to communicate with them, and they begin teaching them also their smithcraft. And there aren't many dwarves who are mentioned by name in this chapter, except for one named Telkar, who is the great smith of Nagrod, who also forges lots of things for them, and it's around, and they have a very good relationship with each other, as Tolkien puts it. Where does he put it? Where is it? Give me a second. Okay. Ever cool was the friendship between the Naugrim and the Eldar. Now, the Naugrim is the Elvish name for the dwarves. So whenever you hear the word Naugrim, those are dwarves. Ever cool was the friendship between the Naugrim and the Eldar, though much profit they had of one another. They had one of the other. But at that time, those griefs that lay between them had not yet come to pass, and King Thingol welcomed them. So this is a time when what is it? Romandir saying, "Hi, guess who finally could pick up a new version of the Silmarillion for my ever-growing collection yesterday? Congratulations, Romandir! Welcome to the reading of the Silmarillion Club, the people who read it a lot." So, so there's a very nice amicable relationship between the Sindar elves and the dwarves, or the Naugrim. I'm going to keep calling them dwarves. Um, and they begin crafting lots of things for them. Uh, Romander saying, "I now have 3 different versions of the Silmarillion." Wow. I still only have the 1 copy. I really should get another that is a little bit more ratty that I can mark up. Because I don't want to mark this one up because right now it's my only copy. But anyway, so so Thingol welcomes the dwarves, and he pays them mostly in pearls, which he's getting from the sea elves. Let's bring up the map again. The sea elves who live round about here and up here, mostly in a city, I think that is up here, called Eglarest. And they get lots of pearls, and they bring them to Thingol, and Thingol uses a lot of those pearls to pay the dwarves, because the dwarves are utterly fascinated by pearls, and they love them, and they treasure them greater than most of the other jewels of the earth. And so with that, what is going on here? Okay. So with that, the dwarves teach them many things. Now, as time goes on, towards the end of the Second Age, we have a bit of a conversation between Melian and the wrong one. And where is he? And Thingol. I should move those together. Hang on. Okay. We have a conversation between Melian and Thingol, where Melian says, "Don't expect the good times to last forever." Essentially, there are dark creatures that could begin stirring again, and you need to think about the future. And so Thingol devises the idea of setting up a fortress of sorts, not more of like a king's hall. And he comes to the dwarves and asks them to help him with this. And together they forge out an area inside the forest, underground, that's called Menegroth, the Thousand Caves. Technically, this is an image of the halls of King Thranduil, because I couldn't find many images uh, of what Menegroth might look like. But it's essentially, it's called, the name Menegroth means the Thousand Caves. And it's a very vast underground realm that is built in equal parts by the dwarves and the elves. So there's this great mingling of dwarven and elven craftsmanship in there, which I think would be such a fascinating thing to see. And also, Melian and her people have been putting together tapestries that tell all the stories of the Valar that are draped everywhere throughout the hall. So it's a very beautiful, very colorful place. And these are the halls of King Thingol. And yes, and Ava just says, Menegroth Heart. Menegroth is a gorgeous place. It's wonderful the way Tolkien describes it. Where is it? Let's see. Okay, here we go. Where the Asgalduin flowed down and parted Neldareth from Region, which are two of the forests that Thingol lives in, there arose in the midst of the forest a rocky hill, and the river ran at its feet. There they made the gates of the hall of Thingol, and they built a bridge of stone over the river by which alone the gates could be entered. Beyond the gates, wide passages ran down to high halls and chambers far below that were hewn in the living stone, so many and so great that that dwelling was named Menegroth, the Thousand Caves. And so that's how the realm of Menegroth is formed. And at this point, still, Ava says, floors of many colored stones. Yes. So I don't really feel like this image, it's the only image of an underground elven kingdom that I could find. And this is Thranduil's realm, which is a bit darker and probably more drab than Menegroth would have been. But still very pretty, so you get the idea. Within Menegroth, Thingol welcomes just about anybody, elves, dwarves, because there are still lots of elves roaming throughout Beleriand, because there's really no reason for them not to. Until we get to the Third Age of the Chaining of Melkor. And that's when things start to go a little south. The dwarves are spending a lot of time in Beleriand, and they begin bringing messages back to Thingol, saying, all is not well in this area. There are fell beasts that are starting to appear. All the creatures that were left behind after the destruction of Angband and Utumno, they're beginning to resurface, and they're beginning to spread out. But they're not really organized. They're just sort of scattered raiding parties. But there's still like some danger there. So the dwarves convince Thingol that maybe now is a time to start looking into making weapons and arming yourselves, because whatever is happening, it's probably just going to get worse. And so they begin fashioning weapons. And it should also be noted at this point, and I forgot to get an image of them, the Nandor elves, which had been living way over here in Eriador. They finally cross over into Beleriand and meet with King Thingol. And Now the Nandor were led by Lenwë, but at this point they're being led by Lenwë's son, Denethor. And Denethor meets with Thingol, and Thingol is like, "Great, more elves! Come and join the fun, join the family." But the Nandor, they really like the wilderness, so they set up their home in this area here called Osirian. Uh, okay, everybody's talking about the different relationships between elves and dwarves, and how they had a good relationship here, and that's how Galadriel remembers the dwarves, which is why she's so friendly to Gimli, which is a fair point. Um, so, so we have now, we've got the Sindar up here, we got the Nandor down here, we got the Sea Elves over here, um, and we've got fell creatures starting to come down here. Now, Tolkien describes them as um, wolves or creatures that take wolf form, primarily. But there is a new creature added to the mix, and this is the first time that they see them, and they don't know what they are. And these creatures are the Orcs. For the first time, the Orcs are starting to come out of hiding, out of the ruins of Angband and Utumno, and they're beginning to set up raiding parties. And it's a bit disturbing because they do bear something of a resemblance to elves. And so, because of course they are elves that were corrupted by Melkor way back in the beginning. And so at first, Thingol thinks that these elves are Avari. Um, and the Avari were the elves who decided not to go on the march to Valinor in the very beginning, and they just stayed in Quevian and sort of did their own thing. And so Thingol thinks that maybe these orcs are actually Avari elves who have gone feral or gone dark. But he can't really prove that, and I believe Tolkien says he gets closer than he suspected, or something like that, uh, in which he guessed all too near. And whence they came or what they were, the elves knew not then, thinking them perhaps to be Avari, who had become evil and savage in the wild, in which they guessed all too near, it is said. Ooh. So the orcs are raiding, but they're not really organized. And then we have the destruction of the trees of Valinor, and everything gone, and everything goes very different. Everything goes very bad very quickly at that moment. Uh, Melkor or Morgoth and Ungoliant, they cross over into Middle Earth, and right around here is the area called Lamath, where Melkor and Ungoliant have their showdown, and Ungoliant attacks him, and he screams, and the entire world hears it. And that was sort of the signal to everybody that down here that things are not going to be the same ever again. And I believe they. Where do we hear this? Okay. Soon afterwards, Ungoliant fled from the north and came into. Oh no, wait, we're getting too far from there. Okay, that's it. Okay, far to the north befell the strife of Morgoth and Ungoliant, but the great cry of Morgoth echoed through Beleriand, and all its people shrank for fear, for they knew for they knew not what it foreboded. For though they knew not what it foreboded, they heard then the herald of death. And so now they know it's about to get real. And that's exactly what happens, because after Morgoth lets out his great cry, the Balrogs come out of Utumno and drive Ungoliant away down into this area here. And as you can see, she's coming down towards the realm of Thingol. And it's at this point that Melian, the Maya, uses her powers to force Ungoliant away from this area and up into these mountains here. And that's where Ungoliant stays. And those become Ered Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror. And so it's at this point that and they became known as Ered Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror, and none dared go thither, nor pass nigh to them. Their life and light were strangled, and their all waters were poisoned. And then we have Morgoth returning to his home in the north and rebuilding his fortress of Angband. And so Morgoth has rebuilt Angband. He's rallied all the orcs and all the fell creatures to them. He's organized them, and now he's sending them out in great numbers and to take over the world. And that's when we have our first battle. I love this. I just love this line here. But Morgoth, as has ever before been told, returned to Angband and built it anew, and above its doors he reared the reeking towers of Thangorodrim, and the gates of Morgoth were but 150 leagues distant from the bridge of Menegroth, far and yet all too near. So he organizes a great host of orcs to assault Thingol. And okay. And they go in two groups, or they intend to assault them on two sides. I should say that. They intend to assault them on two sides. So the orcs come down here. Now the orcs are coming in two hosts. They're going down here. They're going to take this area from the west, and then they also have a group over here that's going to take them from the east. They're going to box them in. They're going to squash them. And it's from here, in this area, that the Nandor see what's going on and try to fight. Now, they're wood elves. They're not very well armed, and they... Light of the King is asking, do we know what a league is compared to a mile? Just curious. I actually don't. That's something that is probably worth figuring out. But it should be noted, the gates of Menegroth are right about here. Angband is way up here. So that should give you a little bit of an idea. So we have the orcs and the elves, and now they're fighting in open combat. We have the first battle in the Wars of Beleriand. And the Nandor and the Sindar here, they utterly decimate the orcs. They leave very few alive to return to Angband. Okay, so Suzanne is saying a league is 5.5 kilometers. And Eravandi saying Google says a league is about 3.45 miles. So 150 leagues is roughly about 500 miles, give or take. Uh, so there you go. That's about how far they are. Uh, so the Nandor and the Sindar, they wipe out the Orcs. Temple saying, awesome. So when I go out on my daily walks, I walk for about a league and a half. I feel so accomplished now. Nice. So, so back to the battle. Uh, the Sindar up here, the Nandor down here. They are able to wipe out the Orc host here almost utterly. Like, there are very few left alive, but it's a very it's a very brutal battle, and a lot of the Nandor are wiped out, including their king Denethor. And the Nandor are very disheartened by this, and they refuse to take another king. And meanwhile, this host here, they're able to really pin in the elves into their havens on the shores. So the orcs have really taken over this area. So we have elves and dwarves and Nandor. We have Sindar, Nandor, and the dwarves able to wipe out the orcs over here. Unfortunately, the orcs over here have really done a number on the elves here on the coast. Uh, so um, so it's at this point the Thingol decides, okay, we really need some protection. Uh, okay, there's some cool stories going on in the chat. I should switch back to the main page so that we can see some of that. But right now we got many visual aids going on. So so at this point, Thingol, let's bring up Thingol again. Thingol calls as many elves as he can to come back to him in his forest and into Menegroth, and just so that they're safe and so um, that they're accounted for. But there are some of the Nandor elves who were so disheartened by the battle and didn't want to be a part of these fights anymore, and so they broke off and went off to do their to stay in the south and to return to the woods far away from these battles. And so we have another splitting of the elves, and these guys who left are called the Lyquendi, the Green Elves. They stay in Osiriand and stay away from all the battles, while the rest of the Nandor go to Menegroth and become part of Thingol's host. And they become part of Thingol's people. And then from there, we have Melian wielding her powers once again. Suzanne is saying, remember when there were only 4 kinds of elves? Yeah, now there's a whole bunch of them. But the ones that we're really focusing on here are the Sindar, of course. That's the name of the chapter of the Sindar. So Melian uses her powers to create a mystical border around the forest, and this is called the Girdle of Melian. And the Girdle of Melian is basically an invisible border that confuses anybody who comes in, turns them back, gets them lost. Basically, it won't let anybody into this realm that isn't willed by either Melian or Thingol. And so this area then takes on the name Doriath, the Guarded Realm. It's the Guarded Realm or the Guarded Kingdom? The Guarded Kingdom, sorry. Land of the Girdle. Within it there was yet a watchful peace, but without there was peril and great fear, and the servants of Morgoth roamed at will, save in the walled havens of the Phalos. Now, the Phalos, I should mention, is down in this area here. This is all the Phalos. This is um, the waterfront areas, and the elves have sort of holed themselves up in the havens there. But right now, so we have these elves here. We have the other elves here in Doriath. We got a few down here in Osirian, and the rest of this is now Orc territory. I like Ustreamer5781 is saying, this is really cool. I've read the Silmarillion and understood it, but this makes it much clearer. Well, I'm glad I'm clearing some stuff up. Sometimes I don't know if I'm actually doing a good job here or if I'm just being a goofy fanboy. So, thank you. So it's at that point, this realm is now all orcs. Suzanne is saying, the mapping of things is always hardest for me because there's very little incomplete maps around, and I would never make heads or tails of it. That's pretty true. That's why I like maps like this that really sort of lay stuff out. So anyway, so we've got Morgoth up in the north. We've got orcs all around here down in the south. We got other creatures running free. We've got Thingol and the Sindar holed up in Doriath. We got the sea elves held up here in the Phalos. We got the Nandor, or the Lyquendi now, down here in Osirian, trying to stay out of the battles and probably hanging out in this forest here. And suddenly what has gone from being a great time to be an elf in Middle-earth has become a terrible time to be an elf in Middle-earth. And it's around this time that Feanor arrives, and he arrives right around here in this area called Drengist, and that's where he burns the ships. And that's where it leaves off. That's where this chapter ends. It ends with Feanor arriving. So we're pretty much now, both stories are kind of caught up to each other. The story of Thingol and the story of Feanor. And yes, we do have a Fingolfin who is still making his way across. And so that takes us into what's been going on in Valinor since Feanor began his trek. And that's the next chapter of The Sun and the Moon and the Hiding of Valinor. Now, I'm actually going to bring in, if I can find it. Give me a second here. There we go. Wow, I got it right away. The Trees of the Valar. Now, where we left off with the Valar, of course, was the trees had been destroyed. The trees had been destroyed by Melkor and Ungoliant. And Feanor has declared his vengeance, taken the Noldor, and left Valinor. And he's also sort of finally told the Valar, like, while you just sit here and mourn, I'm going to go and actually do something. And this is, and it starts off right away with Tolkien saying that Feanor got this totally wrong. It is told after the flight of Melkor, the Valar sat long unmoved upon their thrones in the Ring of Doom. But they were not idle, as Feanor declared in the folly of his heart. For the Valar may work many things in thought rather than with hands, and without voices and silence they may hold counsel with one another. Thus they held vigil in the night of Valinor, and their thought passed back beyond Ea and forth to the end. Yet neither power nor wisdom assuaged their grief, and the knowing of evil in the hour of its being. So the Valar actually were working out a way of trying to rebuild the trees, or something that they could do, but they weren't really getting too much. Light of the King is saying, I think that is what helps, knowing that there are simultaneous stories going on in different areas. That's why this is helping so much. Yeah, that is like one of the things that like I didn't get the first time I read the Silmarillion when I was in high school. Um, the timelines were very weird to me, and so but now now it kind of helps knowing like that we're basically jumping back in time again. We just jumped back in time with the Sindar. Now we're jumping back in time again with the Valar. So eventually, word comes back to Manwë that Feanor has left and he's mocked him and he's gone back to Valinor, or he's gone back to Middle Earth, and he's basically defied Manwë and the Valar in every respect. And Manwë actually cries. He weeps. Uh, and was told by the Vanyar who held vigil with the Valar that the messengers declared to when the messengers declared to Manwë the answers of Feanor to his heralds, Manwë wept and bowed his head. But at that last word of Feanor, that at the least the Noldor would do deeds to live on forever in song, he raised his head as one that hears a voice far off, and he said, "So shall it be. Dear bought those songs shall be accounted, and yet shall be well bought. For the price could be no other. Thus even as Eru spoke to us shall beauty not before conceived be brought to Ea, yet evil, and evil yet be good to have been." But Mando said, "And yet remain evil. To me shall Feanor come soon." Mandos, such killjoy. So Manwë is lamenting the loss of Feanor, but it's around this time also they begin to sort of take stock of everything that's going on in Middle Earth. Um, there are still elves in Middle Earth. There are the Avari. There are the Teleri who were left behind. Feanor is returning to Middle Earth. Men are going to be coming at some point, and it's still shrouded in darkness. And now they've got Morgoth to deal with, and so Manwë calls in Yavanna and Nienna and asks them, please do anything you can to try to revive the trees. And so they do their best. Nienna brings on her healing powers with her tears. Yavanna Suzanne is saying the Valar kind of forgot about Middle Earth until Feanor went back there. Yeah, but now they really want to do something, and they are going to do something. They're going to do something big. So Nienna is using her tears to try to revive the trees. Yavanna is using her song to try to revive them, and they are working day and night and day for a very long time, just trying to get some spark of life out of the trees. And it's just at about the time when they're about to just give up hope that there actually is a little something that happens. Telperion, the silver tree, sprouts one silver flower, and Laurelin, the golden tree, produces one golden fruit. Suzanne is saying, working day and night, how would you know? Yeah. You know what I meant. They're working around the clock. But there are no clocks. They're working a lot. Leave me alone. So we have the silver tree has one flower, and the golden tree has one fruit. And Yavanna and Nienna take them, and after that, the trees die utterly. There is no coming back now. There is nothing left in them. But they have this one fruit and this one flower, and so they go to Aule and they say, build some kind of container for these so that their light never goes out. And Aule does that. And then they decide that it's time to try to rekindle the lights in the world, and they do that with this, and they want to do that with this flower and this fruit. Whoop, wrong one. There we go. And so and so these two vessels, they basically want to launch them up into the sky and have them illuminate the entire world. And so they call up two Maiar to be the ones to do this, to guide them. So we have Tillian, who takes up the job of guiding the island, or was it the vessel of the moon? And then we have Arien. Temple saying, my brain wants to imagine the fruit as a pear. I actually kind of imagine it more peach-like, but that's just me. So they have the two vessels, and they have the two Maiar who are going to guide them throughout the sky. So we have Arien, who's going to guide the sun, and we have Tillian, who's going to guide the moon. That's what they become. And it should be noted that Arien is one of the few fire spirits who wasn't corrupted by Melkor to become a Balrog. So she's essentially what a Balrog would be if it were good, and she wields the power of the sun. So that gives you an idea of how powerful they are. So these two, Tillian is a member of the host of Orome. He's part of his hunting party. But he's always been fascinated by the tree Telperion. And so when the task is offered to take the last flower of Telperion and guide it through the heavens, Tillian signs up for it. And so first Tillian is the one who rises with the moon, and they plot out a course where they basically go from west to east and east back to west, back and forth and back and forth, to keep the world constantly lit. But Varda decides at the end that this is probably not the best idea, because if they do that, then all the starlight gets blocked out. And so instead of having just a constant west to east, then east to west, and back and forth, what they decided to do is have the sun and the moon travel east to west, and then when they get to the far west in Valinor, they actually descend down under Arda, go back around, and then come back up in the east and begin their trek over again. So basically it goes from back and forth to an orbit. Where is it? So this is how the sun operates. This is the Gates of Morn, where the sun and the moon both begin their journey from east to west over the earth. So at first, Tillian and the moon are the only ones in the sky, and when Tillian first rises, that's when Fingolfin first signals his people to begin the long trek across the Helcarax into Middle Earth. Ava's saying, I like how Tolkien made the sun female and the moon male, because it's often the other way around. That's true. And Suzanne is saying, now becomes very much like Helios dragging the sun around in Greek mythology. What is Erebandi saying? But the moon had a crush on the sun, and they kept trying to catch up with her. That's why we have eclipses. Right, I was just about to get to that. Tillian is fascinated by Arien. And so eventually when Arien does launch, and I call it a launch because that's kind of how Tolkien describes it. Where is it? Okay. So Tilion had traversed the heavens 7 times, and thus was in the furthest east when the vessel of Arion was made ready. Then Anar rose in glory. Anar is the name of the sun. And the first dawn of the sun was made like a great fire upon the towers of the Pelori. The clouds of Middle Earth were kindled, and there was heard the sound of many waterfalls. To me, that sounds like the description of a rocket launch. Um, so I would. So when the sun rises, I actually say the sun was launched into orbit, and Arian, who has also gotten rid of her form, she's removed her form of looking like looking like a Valar or a Maiar, looking human like or elf like, and she's just become straight up fire. He says she has become as a naked flame, and she guides the sun in this course across Arda. And Tilion is fascinated with her, and he keeps trying to catch up with her. And so that's why sometimes in the day you will see the sun and the moon in the sky at the same time. And then sometimes the moon will get so close that he'll actually blot out the sun, and thus you have eclipses. Um, and so that, and how they, this is how they operate from here on out. Now, it should be also noted that Morgoth was absolutely destroyed by this. He hated that this light had come, and he was he hated the light of the moon and the sun, but he was also terrified of the sun, and so he had the towers of Thangorodrim, which are the towers behind Angband. He had them go into overdrive. And just spew up tons of smoke and ash to create clouds that would blot out the sun, so that Angband stayed in perpetual night. But he wouldn't try to assault the sun. He was too afraid of it. But he did try to go after the moon. Um, then he assailed Tilion, sending spirits of shadow against him, and there was strife in Ilmen. Ilmen is the atmosphere, or the lower orbit sky. Um, There was strife in Ilmen beneath the paths of stars, but Tilion was victorious. And Aryan Morgoth feared with a great fear, but dared not come nigh her, having indeed no longer the power. For as he grew in malice and sent forth from himself the evil that he conceived in lies and creatures of wickedness, his might passed into them and was dispersed. And he himself became ever more bound to the earth, unwilling to issue from its dark strongholds. Um, So yeah, now Piravani's saying, was there anything Morgoth didn't hate? You know, that's a good point. Like he really does sort of hate everything. Like I was sort of racking my brain. Is there anything that he actually loves? Because like, I mean, he covets the Silmarils, but they also injure him greatly. So he's not very pleased with them. He doesn't really like them very much, but he feels like he has to have them. Kind of like Gollum and the One Ring. Like as Gandalf says, he hates and loves the ring, much as he hates and loves himself. So that's kind of how Morgoth is with the Silmarils. Um, so 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 Morgoth tried to assault the moon and failed, and so from then on, the the sun and the moon began their orbits and would light the earth in nighttime and in daytime. And it was with the first rising of the sun that we enter into our next chapter, where a certain group of people, where are they? A certain group of people arrive in Middle Earth finally. Men! Men awake with the rising of the sun, or with the first rising of the sun, when it first launches out of Valinor. And Tolkien spends a lot of time in this chapter talking about how most most men don't really play much of a part in this, except for those who intermingle with the elves themselves. Because this is mostly about the elves, and there are men who help them out uh, over time. And it's those men who are really focused on in this story. But there are many other men throughout the world. Now, when they're first awoken, nobody comes to them. The Valar are safe in Valinor. I forgot to mention the other part of this story, the hiding of Valinor. I should mention that a little bit. After they've launched the Sun and the Moon, the Valar then decide that it's time to really shut the doors on Valinor. I'm actually going to go back to the main screen for this because I don't really have um, any images for that. So the Valar, they raise up the Pelori Mountains, which are the mountains that surround Valinor. They raise them up to sheer heights, sheer rock faces that nobody can climb, and the only way to get in is through the pass called the Kalakiria, which is a pass that was made for the elves when they first arrived. And the Valar have decided to keep that open um, just so that the light of the sun can continue to come through and light the light the lands for the elves who have stayed behind in Valinor. And so, but they also have a very strong watch on that. And then they also set up a range of islands around the perimeter, or around the eastern perimeter of Valinor, called the Enchanted Isles. And these islands are designed to um, ensnare and confuse and turn away anybody who travels west to try to find Valinor. So once the Enchanted Isles were set, and all the seas about them were filled with shadows and bewilderment, and these isles were strung as a net in the shadowy seas from the north to the south before Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, is reached by one sailing west. Hardly might any vessel pass between them, for in the dangerous sounds the waves sighed over upon dark rocks shrouded in mist, and in the twilight a great weariness came upon the mariners and a loathing of the sea. But all that ever set foot upon the islands were there entrapped, and slept until the change of the world. So anybody, Ava is asking, okay, question. When elves die in Middle Earth, their soul goes to the halls of Mandos. Yes, I'm actually going to get to that, Ava. Hang on. That is a part of the discussion of the men chapter. Um, so and Ava's asking, but if they sail there on a boat, do they get to hang out in Valinor with the Valar? No, they don't. Because the way is shut to the Noldor and to any other elf. They have to. The only way they can get to Valinor is with the strict permission of the Valar. So if they don't have that, then just like anybody else, they will get entrapped on the Enchanted Islands. So uh, the the way is shut pretty much, and that's how that works. The path to Valinor is completely shut out to anybody who is not given express permission by the Valar to enter it. Now, that being said, if an elf were to die, then their soul would travel back to Valinor, but be kept in the halls of Mandos. Uh, and so that's Valinor. It is now completely shut to anybody who lives there. or to anybody who doesn't live there, I should say. And so back to the parchment board. Uh, so what Ava is asking, so Frodo gets to go to Valinor? Yes, he's given special permission. And Sam, yes. Ava says, I feel that the halls of Mandos is such a sad place. They kind of are, and I'm going to get to that a little bit. I'm going to talk about the halls of Mandos a little bit. But first, going to talk about men a bit. Because they awake with the rising of the sun, and none of the Valar are there to greet them. They're in Valinor. Nobody is there to greet them or to guide them or to give them any messages or anything except for Ulmo. Ulmo, the Lord of the Waters, and he tries. He tries to give some messages to men about the power of the Valar and greetings from Mandos, or greetings from Manwë, I should say. But the men aren't. They don't really understand the message. They understand that there is something in the water, and they're drawn to the water, and they're also drawn to the west because that's where the sun first rose, when it first rose out of Valinor. So they like the water, and they're drawn to the west, but they don't know why. Um, they they don't really understand the messages that Ulmo's trying to give them, and they befriend instead some dark elves, some of the Avari, and these are elves who didn't join in the march to Valinor. They never saw the trees. The Valar themselves are kind of just like a distant rumor and a memory to them. And so that's how the men learn about the Valar. So they have a stronger fear of the Valar. Um, and they're yeah, so they have a bit of a fear of the Valar, um, and they tend to sort of go their own way. They have their own curiosities, their own goals. Suzanne was saying they don't understand why. Was almost speaking through a fast food drive-through speaker. No, he was speaking through water. They don't really understand water. Uh, and so the men begin to venture out, and eventually there are certain groups of men who will meet up with Thingol and with the other elves, and they'll join the battle against Morgoth. But that happens later. Um, in this chapter, Tolkien talks a lot about how men are much frailer than elves because they're mortal. Um, they can succumb to sickness and to old age. They can be killed much more easily. But physically speaking, men and elves look very much the same because the elves still have the fire of the spirit within them. It hasn't quite gone out of them over the waning of the years. Um, but he also talks about what happens to men when they die. Where is it? Okay, here it is. So here's an image of the halls of Mandos. Now this is kind of like an afterlife for the elves. This is, but it's a physical place that's in Arda, that's actually on Earth in Valinor. And when an elf is killed, because that's pretty much the only way that an elf can die, their spirit leaves their body and goes here to the halls of Mandos, where it then stays until an appointed time when they'll return to their bodies. So the question is, what happens to men when they die? And they're and since this is told from the perspective of the elves, it's more told in speculation than anything else. Uh, where, um, some of the elves believe that maybe there is a separate area in the halls of Mandos that is just for men. Maybe the spirits of men go somewhere else entirely, like they actually leave Arda and go out into the heavens, out into Ea. Um, and it's really it. They really don't know, and instead, it's all speculation. Some say that they too go to the halls of Mandos, but their place of waiting is not that of the elves, and Mandos under Iluvatar alone, save Manwë, knows whither they go after the time of recollection, in those silent halls behind the outer sea. None have ever come back from the mansions of the dead, save only Baron, son of Barahir, whose hand had touched a Silmaril. But he never spoke afterward to mortal men. The fate of men after death, maybe, is not in the hands of the Valar, nor was all foretold in the music of the Ainur. So, really, we don't know what happens to men. The only one who has ever really uh, come come back from the halls of Mandos, who was a man, was Baron, and he's not talking. There were elves who returned from the halls of Mandos after being killed. Um, one notable one is Glorfindel, um, who you probably might recognize as a character from The Lord of the Rings. Um, he was somebody who he was the character that Arwen replaced in the movies when when Frodo has to be rushed to Rivendell. Um, Glorfindel was part of the host of the Noldor who came across. Um, and he is eventually killed in battle. Now, I don't want to talk too much about it because it is a spoiler for later on in the book. But he eventually is returned to his body during. Suzanne is saying, wasn't that a different Glorfindel? No, it's not. It's the same Glorfindel. He's returned to his body in the Third Age. Uh, and and so he is technically another one of the Noldor elves who stays through the end, but he does spend a good period of time in the halls of Mando, so he's sort of taken out of the game for a while. Um, that's but I don't want to talk too much about Glorfindel because that's a story for a later time. Um, so that's where we are with men. They've come to the earth. They've awakened. They're sort of wandering around aimlessly. Um, uh, and they will eventually meet up with the elves, or some of them will meet up with the elves, and will begin a relationship, a friendship, a bit of an intermingling. One of the last lines here is talking about the intermingling of the lines of elves and men, and the glory and beauty of elves and their fate and in their fate full share had the offspring of elf and mortal, Arundel and Elwing and Elrond, their child. And we're gonna talk a lot about Arundel much later on. He's gonna play a big role. He and Elwing, his wife, are gonna play a big role in the final climax of this huge epic tale. So it's gonna be a while before we get to them. But Elrond is their child, and as we know, Elrond half elven, half man, half elf. And we're going to also talk about what exactly being half man, half elf means. Um, because the precedent for that is set with Baron and Luthien, which we're not too far away from. We've only got a few more chapters before we hit Baron and Luthien. Yeah, I'd say probably. Let me go to the schedule and see when we will get to Baron and Luthien. Now that I actually have one. Okay, so probably about towards the end of June, we will finally get to Baron and Luthien, and that's where the half man, half elf precedent is set. Um, and we'll explain what that means. Um, so that will bring us just about to the end. We're coming up almost on an hour and a half here. So there was a lot going on in this. We're sort of playing catch up with a lot of the other stories that are playing out, because the last few weeks we were talking only about Feanor and what was going on in Valinor, and now we have a better idea of what's been going on in Middle Earth this whole time, how the Valar finally do take action after the destruction of the trees, and then what is it? And then men finally coming into the world. So now we have a sun and a moon. The world is illuminated again. Elves are now fully engaged in battle with Morgoth, and we're going to get into that in the next episode. Light of the King is asking, are we off next week? Yes, we are, just because I need a break. This is like, it's basically like preparing a lecture every week about just a few chapters of the Silmarillion, and quite frankly, it's exhausting. So I'm going to take a week off. So we'll be back in 2 weeks to get back into the main story with the chapter "The Return of the Noldor." And this is a big chapter. A lot happens in this chapter. So let me look at the schedule and the breakdown. Yeah, so we're going to focus just on that chapter for the next episode, which will be in 2 weeks. So that is what is it? Let me look at the date. That is the 17th. Light of the King is saying I'll be doing Mother's Day stuff with my mom and sis. So good. All right, cool. So we got a good yeah, it's Mother's Day. It's a good time to take a break and say hi to mom. So we'll be back May 17th with the Return of the Noldor. And this is the first battles between the elves and Morgoth. Fingolfin will make it back over. We're gonna have some. There are gonna be some casualties this time. Some main characters are gonna get killed off. Temple saying you should hold on to your info so if someone invites you as a guest lecturer somewhere, you're prepared. I don't think that's going to happen, just because when it comes to this sort of thing, believe me, this is total amateur hour what I'm doing. So it and Light of the King is saying it just keeps getting better and better. That's mostly because of the story, not because of what I'm doing. So yeah, the Return of the Noldor is going to be lots of battles, some really harrowing stuff. We're going to get into some really cool stuff also, and we're also going to get into some very sad tidings. The curse of the Noldor will begin to bear fruit, so to speak. So we will be continuing on with the War of the Jewels next week, or in 2 weeks. And also a reminder that in addition to this chapter by chapter of the Silmarillion, we're also going to be reading Childhood's End as our book of the month for May. So we'll be discussing that book. Let me bring up the schedule. It's so cool having a schedule. I can tell you stuff. Um, the discussion of Childhood's End will be on May 31st. So we have 1 week off. We'll have 2 more weeks of the Silmarillion. Then we'll be discussing Childhood's End, and I highly recommend it. It's a fairly fast read. It's not a very long book. It's a fascinating book, and I'm looking forward to talking about it. And part of the reason that I'm starting to schedule this whole thing out is because I'm toying with the idea of when we finally get to the end of the Silmarillion, to the final chapters and the final episode, I want to try to do it with a live audience in another venue. So I'm starting to put that schedule together. I'm starting to put the plans together for that. Whether or not it'll happen, we'll see. I'm starting to talk to some people. The good thing is we got until August, so plenty of time to make this happen. Um, so that's Temple saying, of course, having Suzanne there adds to the fun of it all because of the dolls. Of course, believe me, I understand. Suzanne and the dolls is fantastic. So whether or not the live audience thing will happen, I don't know. But like I said, we've got till the end of August, so we got an entire summer for me to try to make this happen. Um, so yeah, I will see you in 2 weeks for the return of the Noldor. If you can, try to pick up Childhood's End. I highly recommend it. I loved it, and I'm looking forward to talking about it at the end of May. And I will see you on the 17th. And where is it? I will see you on the 17th, and never stop reading.